Hi, my name is Kerry Sutcliffe and I'm the hypnobirthing mum. And I want to spend a few minutes just telling you a little bit about each of my three births. So, if we start with my first birth, when I was pregnant, I was roughly 30 weeks when I stumbled across a poster at work that said, "Would you like a relaxing and enjoyable birth?" And it grabbed my attention because I wasn't aware that birth could look anything other than what I'd seen in the movies and the TV shows where it was extremely painful and that's something you just had to get on with in order to start a family, which is what my husband and I wanted to do. However, I went along to the hypnobirthing information session and it grabbed my attention further. My background is in counseling and psychology, predominantly with people with anxiety and depression, and the hypnobirthing approach really attracted me to the idea of the power of the mind and how useful it can be during the birthing process. So I did my hypnobirthing course back in the UK, and like I say, I was around 30 weeks pregnant, and I then started doing my practice on a daily basis. I threw myself into this idea that birth could look something different to what I'd seen in the movies and so on. And I very much got my husband on board with this too. So he came along to the course, a bit skeptical, a bit unsure to begin with, but also really open to the idea that he wanted to support me in whatever I wanted to do. And he was very, very willing to give it a go, basically. So, however, when I was around 38 weeks, my baby was still breech at this stage. And my biggest fear leading up to birth was the idea of an epidural. It was just something that I just didn't like the idea of, basically. I don't have a phobia of needles or anything. I just didn't like the idea of the epidural. And the conversation with the doctors, it became apparent that I had a couple of options. I could either have a cesarean, where I could be booked in the following week, go along, have my baby, and that would be that. Or there was a procedure called an ECV, an external cephalic version, where they could attempt to move baby around in my womb. And they weren't offering me a vaginal breech birth at that stage where I was birthing, and it wasn't something that I was aware of because the hypnobirthing course that I did back in the UK didn't go into the level of detail that I now teach at the Hypnobirthing Australia program. So instinctively, I just felt like I wanted to try the ECV. I wanted to attempt to move baby into a head down position so that I could go on to have a vaginal breech birth. And my first experience of really putting the hypnobirthing techniques into practice was when I had that ECV. So I went along at around 38 weeks to the hospital and I was able to, during that procedure, which when I read up about it, it was very much described as being very painful, sore. Even when the doctor came into the room to do it, I remember she kind of pulled up her sleeves and said, "Now, this is going to be brutal." And I thought, okay, right, well, mind over matter, hypnobirthing techniques. I'm going to let that go because that's not going to assist me during this procedure. I'm going to stay relaxed. I used visualizations to imagine my baby moving around. I used some gas and air as a form of pain relief. And I really relaxed just to let my stomach go and give baby the best possible chance to be able to move. And the doctor did the ECV within literally a minute or so. And I remember she stood back going, "Well, that was easy, wasn't it?" And I came out of it thinking, yeah, that was. It was a good, positive experience for me, the ECV. And then baby was in a head down position. So then we went home and I was 38 weeks and we waited for baby to come. And we waited a little bit longer. My due date came and went. And when I was 10 days past my due date, I woke up in the early hours of the morning feeling some cramping style sensations, few tightenings. And I remember waking up thinking, I think this could be it, but I wasn't sure. It was very mild. And I fell back to sleep. And then I woke up roughly an hour later and again thought, yeah, I can feel something happening. Again, I think this might be it. But I'd also had this idea that birth was going to be a 24 plus the labor and 24-hour plus labor where I would go for a long walk and I would take a bath and so on. So again, I was able to drift back off to sleep thinking that this might be the start, but baby's not going to come just yet. And I managed to sleep on and off for about the first 4 or 5 hours. And by about 5 a.m., then I was awake. These sensations, or these surges, as I call contractions, had got my attention by this point. So I got up, I moved around, I got in the shower for a while, and I did that for about 4 hours. And at 9 a.m., I called the midwifery unit and gave them the backstory of, how I was presenting, the time it had been going on for, and so on. And I remember the midwife said to me, well, come on in, we'll take a little look. Because even during that phone call, I had a contraction, I had a surge. And I remember thinking, to the midwife on the other end, all she heard was me having a conversation and then me saying, just hold on 1 second. And for a minute or so afterwards, she would have just heard some heavy breathing from me. And then I came back to the call. And I think I said something like, oh, sorry about that. So she said, come on in, we'll take a look. So my husband and I, we got in the car, we traveled to the hospital, which was about a 15-20 minute drive. And I was having a number of surges again every 3 or so minutes. Okay. And when we got to the hospital, I went to an assessment area. And I remember walking into the assessment area, there was still a bit of a niggling doubt at that point, so thinking, I really hope they don't say that I'm just 2 centimeters, because I feel like I'm doing really well, but it would be nice and encouraging if I'm maybe a little bit further along than that. And I went to the assessment area, and the midwife was about to do the standard checks, the blood pressure and so on. And I just stood there at the end of the bed, and I remember taking a big deep breath, and I just said, I can't do this. And clever midwife, she picked up on that. That can be a common thing that women might say during the transition stage, which is when we're going from full dilation into the pushy stage. So the midwife took that cue and said, let's do a vaginal examination first. Let's see where you're at. And upon that vaginal examination, they saw that I was fully dilated. And I remember at that point hearing that, I remember thinking, I've got this. I'm fully dilated. I'm about to have my baby. This is great. So we moved from the assessment area to the birth center. And when we got to the birth center, I got into the water. And I kept going with my surges, going with my contractions for 2 hours. But it was fine. I was more than happy. So I was in what can be called the rest and be thankful stage, where I was still experiencing surges, but I hadn't yet got that urge to breathe down, bear down, and push my baby out. After 2 hours, I did. During that time, the midwives sat back, they watched, they waited. And I had my husband by my side, supporting me, giving me words of encouragement, and just knowing that he was there with me. And so then after 2 hours, I got the urge, and I started to bear down and breathe down and move my baby out. And towards the end, her heart rate dropped a little bit. So the midwives asked me to get out of the water, and I got onto this big, comfy beanbag. Okay. And then within a few pushes, she was born, and she was absolutely fine. And that moment was just so amazing. I remember saying out loud, I would do that again today. And that is not any kind of story that I'd ever heard about somebody giving birth for the first time. I was like, I would do that again today. And then my hypnobirthing techniques had to come into play again, because I had what's called a retained placenta. So I'd birthed my baby, but the placenta was not coming out. And this was something that I didn't even know was possible. And the hypnobirthing course that I did back in the UK doesn't go into as much detail as what I now teach with Hypnobirthing Australia. So all of a sudden I had to adapt to the circumstances that were presenting in front of me. But my hypnobirthing techniques came straight through again, because ultimately it was going to require me to go to surgery. I was going to require a spinal block to numb the area while they removed the placenta. And that had been my biggest fear and reservation leading up to birth. So I went into theatre, and I still was able to stay really calm and positive. Baby was with my husband, and I just breathed. I had great visualizations in my mind. I stayed calm and relaxed, despite being in a circumstance that involved my biggest fear leading up to birth. And ultimately, then I came out of theatre. I was reunited with my husband and my baby. And I just remember thinking, birth's brilliant. Aren't I amazing? Isn't my body amazing? This is absolutely fantastic. Why didn't anybody tell me that birth could be so good. And I had friends at the time too giving birth to their own babies who didn't quite have the same experiences as me. And it wasn't because I was any better at them at giving birth. I'm not. I just prepared in a different way. And ultimately, my baby, we called her Hollie, Hollie Mae, and ultimately her birth really started this journey of me now teaching hypnobirthing. I went on to have two other fabulous births, different circumstances. Every birth is different and unique, and I'll tell you about those births as well. But ultimately, my first birth was amazing. Your first experience can be amazing too. It was absolutely brilliant, and I can't wait to tell you more about my other daughter and my son's births as well.